All right. Hello. Welcome in. Another YouTube live time. It seems like we're doing this pretty regularly now these days. That is because it is hashtag conference realignment season, SZN season. So we're going to be doing a lot of lives here as updates come in. And as you can tell, likely by the title of this video, we have some pretty important news to break down today. And that is a report that has come to us from the Arizona 24/7 sports sites. Wildcat Authority, I believe, is the name of that. And they are indicating that the Big 12 will meet on Tuesday with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado, the four schools that had been previously really discussed and linked to the Big 12, the four that seem to be the most sensical for the league. And it feels like this is all moving pretty quickly. And that seems to be a theme here over the last couple of days of just following this and what is going on. It's that everything seems to be moving very quickly, in large part, big picture wise, because TV contracts are coming up, right? A lot of these leagues are going to be negotiating new TV contracts or attempting to if they are a league like the Pac-12. So it's imperative for everybody to figure out who the hell is going to be in these leagues. So it seems like there's going to be a lot more movement, more corresponding moves that happen quickly in a much quicker fashion than what we saw last year when it was Texas and Oklahoma, then the Big 12 adding four, and then it all kind of like just stood pat there for a while, at least at the Power 5 level. So that is big news, and I can tell it's going to be a big chat the way this is going already. So thank you, everybody that's in here. I don't even have time to shout everybody out because this thing is filling up. It is filling up. If you are new here, let me remind you how this works, okay? Those of you that have been here for the chats, you guys know how this works, and I'm sure are tired of hearing me say it by this point. But we're going to have a ton of people in the chat. There's going to be a lot of discussion. There's no way I'm going to be able to get to it all. If you want to make sure that your question or comment gets in the chat and gets to my attention and I see it, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something, donate, attach that to your chat. Then I will see it. That ensures that I do read it, helps you control where the chat is going tonight, and supports the work that I'm doing here to bring you conference realignment and Big 12 content on a regular basis. If you are new, this is basically a Big 12 channel, college football in general, but we go at it from a Big 12 slant. And so that is what you are going to get here. And that is thus why we are starting with this report about the four schools from the Pac-12 potentially talking to the Big 12 on Tuesday. Also, if everybody that's in here could just go like the video, I would appreciate that a lot. That's a very easy way to support the channel that doesn't cost you a cent. If you're not into donating, if you're not into trying to get your question or comment up there, you can just click that like button, and that will help me out as well. There's one free thing you can do to help out the channel. So I would really appreciate it if you would do that. Also, man, I tried to compile what I think is the most poignant information realignment-wise for you to bring to you on this chat here and related again back to Big 12 country. The other thing I thought was the most interesting that we're going to get to is what we found out numbers-wise about the Big 10 and Oregon and Washington. One phrase that I've seen used about them right now as far as it relates to the Big 10 is tweeners. That they're tweeners. They're obviously better than the rest of the pack, but they are not quite good enough to meet the monetary threshold to get into the Big 10, which means they don't provide enough money to the TV contract if you're going to add them to your conference to make it worth everybody's while. And so in a roundabout way, that affects a school that we've talked about a lot here, and that is Kansas and their Big 10 prospects. Because if Oregon and Washington are not going to be enough, if Oregon and Washington are not going to be enough monetarily to get into the Big 10, what in the world would make you think that Kansas would ever have enough punch to it to get into the Big 10? It is not looking very likely there. So we'll discuss that. Dennis Dodd, I don't know how into Dennis Dodd you guys are at this point. He was, by the way, the person that said 2 days ago the Big 12 would not be aggressive, and that, Big 12 source said, like, why would we talk to these Pac-12 schools? And now that looks to be incorrect based on the other reporting that we're seeing. But he did put together like a potential scenario of like a mashup between the two conferences that I know is going to be controversial because I saw how you all reacted to it on Twitter. So we can get to that as well. But really, I would like this to be, in addition to the info that I'm going to bring you, I would like this to be as driven by you guys as possible, much like it was on Thursday when we first got the news about UCLA and USC going on the move to the Big 10, where it was a lot of your questions. So if you guys donate, hit the $ below the chat box where it says say something, get your questions or comments in there. We can attack plenty of those tonight as well. So with that, we are off and running. And I'm going to actually start with a donation here before I get into the report because David was first in. So I appreciate that, David. David says, what about Colorado State and Boise State? Do you think they will join? I don't. I mean, I think if you are Memphis, Colorado State, Boise State, you're probably not thrilled about these recent developments here. Because look, I mean, I think the concern now is, hey, if you're adding Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, what are you actually adding monetarily? Like, is this going to make for a bloated Big 12 with those four schools anyway? We're already talking about there being a meeting with those four schools. I think you're kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum there if you're thinking about Colorado State, Boise, Memphis, and those schools. You have to be. I mean, if we're sitting here getting reports from Oregon, by the way, it's an Oregon source that was talking about Oregon and Washington not bringing enough value to the Big Ten and framing them kind of as tweeners. If they're tweeners, I mean, we got to start talking about the Big 12. Like, if Oregon and Washington are going to strike out trying to get into the Big Ten, like, wouldn't the Big 12 then become? I mean, that's kind of like next on the list. I mean, I guess you go knock on the door of the SEC, and maybe the SEC would want to take those schools just to keep the Big Ten from grabbing them eventually. But I don't know. Like, I think that would be more the conversation than Colorado State, Boise State, et cetera, for me right now. But I appreciate the question, and I feel for you if you're a fan of one of those schools. I feel for Memphis fans, fans of schools that didn't quite make that cut with the four that got into the Big 12, and you're sitting there wanting to get in because right now the Big 12 is in much more of a power position and can kind of go out, hopefully add these four, and then sit around and say, hey, Oregon and Washington, your conference is blowing up, dude. We just took four other schools. There's not going to be a Pac-12. You better find something. And even if that's going to be temporary, like a temporary home in the Big 12, hoping to eventually get to whatever these super conferences turn into on down the road, that's something that would be great for the league in the short term. So weird times, crazy times, wild times, but I don't think good times for some of those smaller schools that we're hoping to get in. Okay. Juan, thank you for the donation, Juan. Juan says, go Houston Cougs. Juan, our resident biggest Houston fan here in the chat. How many teams do you think the Big 12 ends up with? If so, who from the Pac-12, ACC? Yeah, I mean, I think right now the safe bet is just the four: Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Arizona State from the Pac-12. That seems to me to be the safest bet. But, I've heard some talk about the ACC, and that I think is based around like, hey, what happens if I'm seeing more chatter that like legitimately Clemson, Florida State, Miami could try to actually pay their way somehow out of that 14-year television contract and make their way to the SEC. If the ACC starts blowing up, then, are you able to pluck some teams from there? Maybe so. We'll see. But for right now, I think it's just I would go with those four. I would go with those four from the Pac-12. And again, outside shot that Oregon and Washington are left with no other options this round, and they almost have to by default fall into your lap. That would maybe be the other thing. Or maybe the ACC gets in on that action too, in trying to scoop them up. So, James, I appreciate the donation. James says, do you think the Big 12 ends up with Oregon and Washington? Worth it to go to 18? Go Cougs. Hey, another Coug fan. And I don't know actually this time whether it's Houston or BYU. Well, great question, James. And kind of as I've been laying out there, like, I think that's the only scenario in which it happens is if it's like a temporary thing. If it is Oregon and Washington get left without a home because the Big 12 takes four more teams from the Pac-12, effectively disintegrating it. There is a lot of talk of Stanford being a partner with Notre Dame to the Big 10. So if Stanford's gone and then those four are gone and you have five more gone from the Pac-12, Oregon and Washington are going to have to find a home somewhere. Maybe it turns into a temporary home in the Big 12 until we get to the next iteration of whatever it's going to be, where you would figure that Oregon and Washington make the cut into the big boy club of college football. So I think that's your scenario. I think that's how it happens, James. And yes, it would be absolutely worth it to go to 18 if you get those two. The estimation that I saw for the value of those two combined would be like $60 million-ish. Big 12 would take that in a heartbeat. You do it. You do it. No questions asked. Absolutely, you get to 18 and just figure out the rest later. It's stupid. I understand like the logistics of that are stupid, but this is the game we are playing now. All right, I see a couple donations. I will get to those in just 1 second. Let me read you guys what we have here from wildcatauthority.com. Wildcatauthority.com, which is the Arizona 24/7 site. Sources indicate to wildcatauthority.com that there is a meeting between members of the Pac-12 and Big 12 scheduled for Tuesday. As of now, the meeting is to discuss Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado joining the Big 12. It is not clear how far down the line the conversations currently are, and this is not the first discussion. However, it has been stated that Tuesday is by far the biggest meeting of significance that has taken place. When USC and UCLA left the Pac-12, it sent shockwaves throughout the conference. Most of these conversations that have taken place within member schools have not dealt with saving the Pac-12, but rather where else the schools could end up. This is a fluid situation and things can change, but the general belief is that the Pac 12 will be difficult to save. Oregon and Washington are actively looking to get out of the conference. Stanford is rumored to be a serious candidate to join the Big Ten. And other conferences, such as the Mountain West, don't have the market impact to keep the Pac 12 as a serious conference. So, all of that, I would say, I would profess to you, all of that is pretty good news, man. I mean, I said it from the beginning. I think this is like a kill or be killed situation. That's how you have to look at it if you're the Big 12. Like, I don't know. I legitimately don't know if you're making more per school at all by adding these 4 teams. In fact, I mean, there's a chance that having to split it 4 more ways with football brands that are about the same as what you already have, like that may not actually make you any richer as a school, but it will pretty much kill the Pac 12. I mean, the Pac 12 is going to have a hard time surviving if you do that. And so you just have to go for the kill shot, man. It is no time to be timid. It is no time to be taking any chances. You need to go start scooping up schools and try to position yourself as just the home for like the second tier. You want to be that third conference, that number 3, and you want to just wait for everything else to blow up and take in the best of what you can and be lined up as that third best conference. That I think is that's got to be the mission here of the Big 12, and it means you absolutely need to do that. Another thing that I thought was interesting out of that was just the fact that it says most of the meetings within the conference, within the Pac-12, have been about where everybody's going to wind up, as opposed to trying to galvanize and save the league. Because some of the reporting that we had seen already, and this is a part of just hashtag conference realignment season, like what happens. Some of the reporting that we had seen indicated otherwise, that there were plenty of conversations about, hey, we need to all band together. This needs to be us against the world. We got to save our league and that type of thing. This is basically saying, no, that's not what's happening. And to be honest, I mean, remember last July, it didn't feel like the Big 12 was very unified and having a bunch of meetings being like, hey, we're all in this together. Let's go get them. No, it felt like it was teams really looking to, Oklahoma State. We had like Robert Allen, who's really connected in Stillwater, saying Oklahoma State's talked to literally every league. Like they're going around trying to do that. Obviously, it was Kansas in the Big Ten. Like everybody was out for themselves as opposed to banding together. So this is not really a time where I'd expect there to be a lot of banding together. And I understand, because the schools can't really be doing that at this point. You got to have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That's the only way really to operate right now. So that's a pretty big report. I mean, I think we all knew that was a likely scenario, and those were 4 schools that would really make sense for the Big 12. But to actually have it put out there by somebody from Pac-12 country, especially the fact that it's on the Pac-12 side of things, I think that's a very good sign. Very good sign for the league. All right, let me run through some donations here. If you want to donate, you click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Support the work I'm doing here on this channel, and make sure that your question or comment makes it onto the chat. Boom to the Sooner. What's up, Boom to the Sooner? Oklahoma fan here in the chat, talking about us schleps that won't be in the SEC with him, but I appreciate it. Boom to the Sooner says, do you think there will ever be any type of ACC and Big 12 merger, and would it be a good idea? It seems not in the – I wouldn't say that it's likely. I certainly wouldn't say that it's likely, but I think it's a possibility. And I think it becomes a possibility if it's like, again, there just becomes like one big super league that is the second tier league, right? I mean, it almost feels like we're starting to head towards like the Pac-12 is going to get 4 teams picked off. Stanford goes with Notre Dame to the Big Ten. And then the ACC, they're going to find a way to get Clemson, Florida State, and Miami out of that ridiculous grant of rights that they have right now, and push them into the SEC. And if that happens, well, now the ACC is really kind of crumbling. And so then you would almost have just like this conglomeration of whatever's left into one conference. And I don't know how exactly that would work. Like if you would be able to take everybody in, I would think in that scenario, there's probably some schools that decide to go. Maybe some schools really do go that route. Like we saw the report, which I don't know that it was really, I don't believe it, but a report like Kansas was talking about going to the Big East for basketball, independent for football, or dropping football or whatever. There would be some schools maybe considering some things like that. I think like I feel for Oregon State and Wazoo, they're probably in any scenario headed for like the Mountain West. So you would drop off and lose some of those. I don't know if you could take all of them together, but that would be the only way I really see it happening, is if you start getting all those schools picked off, then you could wind up with this one big, like kind of leftover conference. And maybe that is branded as the Big 12, which wouldn't that be ironic if after all the dust settles, you have two other leagues blowing up before the Big 12, and then the Big 12 is there. So that's kind of how I see it. Boom to the Sooner. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your donation as always. Bry Guy 2724. What's up, Bry Guy? Bry Guy says lost in the shuffle. But what do you think the big moves do to Avery Johnson's decision between Oregon, Washington, and K-State? Okay, so for the uninitiated there, Avery Johnson, 4-star quarterback, Elite 11. He was in, the last I saw, the top 5 in that group of the Elite 11 quarterbacks and then made the cut. I think it's been K-State the whole time anyway, just based on all the clues we've been able to read. Plus, Washington already took a commitment from another quarterback, and Oregon supposedly is the leader for Dante Moore, who might be the best quarterback in the class, not named Arch Manning. So there were way too many signs already pushing Avery Johnson to K-State that I doubt this has a much of an effect. Plus, like, I just don't think the kids think about this as much. I think a lot of them feel like they're going to be a year or two in and then out to the NFL, whatever. I mean, I know that's not going to be accurate. You can't just go one and done, but I feel like they don't think about that kind of thing. I think it takes longer for it to have an effect on the kids. And I think all the signs are pushing us to K-State anyway, as he is set to announce on the 5th. So I don't, long story short, think it has a ton of an effect. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. I would wonder more about like Oregon and Dante Moore, like what it does in that kind of a scenario and situation, as opposed to Avery Johnson. But it's a good question, and I appreciate the question. Glenn, what's up, Glenn? Glenn says, boy, does the Big 12 look good now. Go BYU. Yes, feels much better to be a Big 12 fan right now than it did 11 months ago. Or shoot, we're in July. All right, 12 months ago. We're in that same magical month that we hit last year when all of this happened first. You are right. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you for being here. BYU in a good position here, and I'd be interested what BYU fans think of potentially having the Holy War as a conference game now in the Big 12, because it seems like we're headed there pretty fast. And as I saw somebody say, I wish I could credit the right person, and I'm sorry that I'm forgetting who this was. No, I think it was Christian Simmons, who's a UCF guy. He's had a lot of really good tweets here in the last couple of days, but he said, look, mega conferences, they're stupid and it's frustrating, but the Big 12 with rivalries like BYU, Utah, Arizona State, some of the Texas schools, if you pair all that together, like that could be still where college football kind of sort of lives in a weird way like it used to be. And then you'll have the super conferences doing all the weird stuff coast to coast, and taking away some of those rivalries elsewhere. Now that's not totally accurate, because like Texas A&M will become a thing once again in the SEC. And so you get the point, but the Big 12 could have some pretty cool inventory with rivalries like that one coming in. R Webb, I appreciate the donation. R Webb has been in here a lot. He's a really good follow on Twitter too. I would suggest that. Says, John, you only need enough ACC teams with better homes for them to vote to dissolve the conference, and thus no grant of rights. Question is 50% plus one, 67 or 75% vote. Okay, well, yeah, look, I am the ACC is the conference that I know least about here at this point. I mean, I'll just be straight up with you on that. I have not followed a lot of what is being said around ACC country right now. So you're saying basically if enough ACC teams feel like they have a landing spot, they can get together and vote and dissolve the conference, and then the grant of rights goes away. Okay. But again, I don't feel like that changes a lot of what my scenario is with how the Big 12 would ever merge in some way with the ACC. You would just be scooping up leftovers after the prime candidates there in that league have already found homes. And then that changes the dynamics on everything. I do know one thing that was talked about early on is like, hey, if the ACC decides to expand, they can renegotiate the TV deal and all of that, and that would change some of the dynamics there. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's the route that people are really thinking it's going to go right now. Juan, appreciate it. Juan says, just to clear it up, the Houston Cougs is double O, double O as in Cougs. All the other Cougars call themselves Cougs with C-O-U. Okay. To us, that sounds more like Cows. All right. That's it. See, I didn't know that, Juan. And Juan, I think you've been someone who's had to correct me a couple times when I see somebody else in there saying go Cougs, and I get it mixed up, which one, if we're talking about BYU, if we're talking about Houston. Thank God it looks like Wazoo isn't joining the conference. If we had a third, my head might explode in terms of trying to determine who is what in that situation. So thank you for that, Juan. Thank you for that. Much appreciated, my friend. Big Red 95. What's up, Big Red 95? Big Red 95. See, Big Red 95 makes me think you're a Nebraska fan, but I'm seeing the comment here, Big Red 95, and it looks like you're a BYU fan. Very interesting. Big Red 95 says, appreciate the Big 12 coverage. Hooked since BYU joined last year. How long before the teams in these super conferences get tired of being mediocre, and will that mediocrity impact ratings and revenue? That is a good question, and kind of opening up the potential in game of like college football as a sport. And this is something I think we discussed last year too. It's like, hey, there is a point where you could get to nobody wants to watch this anymore because you've lost so many regional fans. And then, yes, there will be like teams that are pretty mediocre. They get tired. It gets kind of blah. There's just not as much of a, it becomes like I was at a bar last night and there were a couple of professional football leagues on. Is it the USFL that's playing right now? I mean, I don't even know. I saw Cavante Turpin, shout out to a former TCU Horned Frog there playing. But it's like, those kind of leagues never really succeed. And if it does eventually turn totally into that and we lose all the things that made college football great, the regional rivalries, some of the zaniness, the goofiness, if that stuff starts to go away and it becomes a little bit too corporate, so to speak, a little bit too much like the NFL light, yeah, I do think there's a chance that happens. And I think the very intriguing part will be, yes, if these conferences, especially if they start cutting dead weight, and we end up with just the best of the best in like one or two leagues, how is that going to affect a lot of fan bases? Talk to like Tennessee, talk to like Florida State, how those fan bases have handled all of a sudden being mediocre or worse. Talk to Texas about what it's like as a fan base when you have sky high expectations and then you turn into a mediocre program. It drives you nuts, freaking nuts. So I think that will be something that's going to be very fascinating to watch when we get there. So I think it's a good comment. Wolf 58, what's up, Wolf 58, my guy? It's been a minute. Wolf 58 says, finally, I'm seeing a live chat live. Good to see you, John. All hail the growing Big Ten. Next conquest, Stanford and Notre Dame. Mark it down. Yes, Wolf 58, our Buckeye fan in here. Great to see you, Wolf 58. And I think you're right. I would have been skeptical about Stanford at first, but I've seen enough buzz about it now. It seems pretty logical that is going to be the dancing partner for Notre Dame if Notre Dame decides to go. And another consistent thing you're seeing reported across the board is that basically we're waiting on Notre Dame right now. Next domino to fall will be whether or not Notre Dame decides that they want to go join the Big Ten, and that their partner would be Stanford in that, which it's a natural rivalry for Notre Dame already. It's a school that matches like the Big Ten's academic profile, the Olympic sports. You're taking you get the big football power in Notre Dame, and then you take like all the ancillary stuff with Stanford. And to me, it feels a lot like the pairing of USC and UCLA. You get SC with the football brand and the football prowess, and then you get UCLA for a basketball program and being in LA. It's like you're taking some of the other stuff along with that. So that seems to be the most likely scenario, which I would have thought right away, much more likely in Oregon or Washington or both, wind up making their way into the fray before Stanford did. I even saw some speculation, maybe like Stanford and Cal would both just close up shop on their football programs. But it seems like Stanford really, really still has a fighting shot here. So yeah, that is what I would anticipate would happen, Wolf 58. And you know what? I really hope Notre Dame does join the Big Ten. I'm just at the point, I'm tired of Notre Dame being on this island and holding the rest of the football world hostage, holding the ACC hostage, like all this stuff. Just join a league. Just go with the flow, get with it, join a league, Notre Dame, and stop being so hoity-toity about it. All right. So I'm here for it. Plus Stanford leaving, I think it's another blow to the Pac-12. It would further disintegrate the conference. Garrett, appreciate it. Garrett says the Big 12 should get Wazoo to corner the market on Cougars. And Garrett, that was actually said before I just went through my spiel on Cougars and getting the Cougs all mixed up all the time here on the channel. So you were a man ahead of your time. Thank you for the donation. Dave, what's up, Dave? Dave, thank you for the donation. Dave says, take the Zonas, Colorado and Utah. Take Washington and Oregon if they don't go to the Big Ten. Finish out with Louisville and Pitt when the ACC dies to go to 20. Add two other ACC schools if Washington and Oregon go to the Big Ten. Go Bearcats. All right, Cincinnati fan in the house. What up, Dave? Thank you for that. That's like best case scenario. I mean, I love that. And that is a version of what I was talking about with scooping up some of the ACC leftovers. So think about that. I mean, even if it's not Oregon and Washington, if it's Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah, Pitt, Louisville, and then maybe two other ACC schools. Now you're like starting to gather this collection of the best of the rest, and you'll be kind of doing your own thing. And I think with that league, assuming that it's like a 12-team playoff, even if there's not auto bids, like that league should be able to put one, maybe two teams into the playoff consistently every year. And that at least gives you a chance to keep your recruiting at least decent, because, recruiting takes a massive hit if recruits don't feel like you have an actual path to the playoff and the championship. That could at least open up still enough of a door there that I think maybe long-term you can survive for a little while like that. So yeah, I would be very excited about that possibility. Again, we're throwing any semblance of travel partners, any semblance of any of that making sense out the window with this, but we're way beyond that point. So yeah, I'm here for it. And you can start to see how that scenario would be realistic, which is crazy that the Big 12 now could actually be that spot that turns into the best of the rest and where everybody goes to land when everything else blows up. So wild world that we're living in. Zach, appreciate the donation. Zach says Memphis and Boise have to be kicking themselves for not being ready for the Big 12 in recent expansion. Yes. I think, Memphis especially, like Memphis, Boise, I guess I'd be curious what Boise fans feel about all this. They've always kind of done their own thing and had plenty of success anyway, almost like a Gonzaga-y sort of feel on a lesser level in the college football world. But yeah, the way this is going, it seems like they're going to get really left in the dust here, which does suck. I mean, like Boise is one of those great things about college football that I love. And if Boise truly is going to get really left behind in all this, that's rough, man. And that's lame. That is very lame about what is happening to the sport because of TV and because of dollars. But Memphis, I mean, it's a killer because they just made this big pledge to upgrade the Liberty Bowl, which they desperately need. You guys, I'm not going to spend a bunch of extra time trashing the Liberty Bowl, the physical stadium here, but you've heard my opinion having been there twice to cover two Liberty Bowl games that K-State played in. It's not good, and they needed to do that, but they've pledged to do that, and they're doing some of the right things, and they've had some real success in the AAC recently, but it is not looking good for Memphis. It is not looking good for Memphis the way this is all going right now. So meanwhile, had you been in that group, what, like, for instance, like what would a UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, if they had not been in the cut to join the Big 12 this last time around, there'd be a lot of uneasiness there too, much like there has to be for Memphis and Boise State. So yeah, it's also to me kind of reminiscent of like when TCU got left out of the Big 12 for Baylor back in 1996, right? And there was a lot of frustration there about getting left behind. It's kind of the same deal here. Now they still had a chance, TCU, years later to get back into the club. This may be the last train leaving the station here. I mean, this may literally be the last train leaving the station here to have any shot at doing that. So that's a real bummer. And one of the things that bums you out about the situation that we're in right now with the state of realignment. Revin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Revin, let me know if I'm not. Says, bummer, Boise State is going to get left out in the cold, I bet. I just hope Cal gets stuck in the Mountain West with them. Crazy times we live in. Thanks for the content. Man, yeah, it's bumming me out. I really appreciate you being in the chat, and I really appreciate you donating there. I mean, I hate to say it, but that is the way I feel right now. There's too much. The Big 12 is actually swimming in higher up waters, which a lot of us did not think was going to happen, especially at this time last year. And it sucks. Boise's been a great part of the culture in college football and done incredible things. And it breaks my heart, man. It breaks my heart. And trust me, I empathize with you because, I mean, look, I'm a K-State fan. You guys see the poster behind me. I thought last year, like a school that twice has been within an eyelash of playing for the national championship, has won multiple Big 12 championships, won one this past decade. Like with all that still happening, looked like K-State was going to get left out and left behind in the same spot. So like, I truly do empathize, and I wish it weren't this way. I really do. But appreciate you being here and paying attention, and I wish nothing but the best for you in Boise, assuming again that you are a Boise fan, man. So it's tough. That's tough. All right, I'm getting caught up on the donations here. You guys have been awesome with this tonight. Who am I? I go too far here. Nope, I didn't. We got a lot. Okay, I'm trying to get caught up. All right. So we move on now to Jason. Jason, how can the ACC realistically get picked off with their crazy buyout? Notre Dame is different because their football team is not a part of the ACC, and it's obviously worth it to buy them out. Well, all I know, and I think Dennis Dodd was one of the places that I read this today. So, and again, I don't mean to like trash him. It just seems like some of his information has been a little more all over the map, as evidenced by his initial report that the Big 12 was not really that interested in being aggressive. But he and others have been speculating now that like there would be a way to get them out financially of the grant of rights, that somehow they could figure out a way to come to an agreement to actually get out of that. But the other is, as like our Webb said earlier in the chat, that if enough of the ACC schools felt like they had better homes to go to, they could all get together and vote to dissolve the conference. If they decided to expand, they could also like renegotiate the contract. Like there seem to be a couple avenues, even with that 14 years that's left on their TV deal. I don't have like this information myself. I'm not sure that I'm smart enough to understand all of it, but the industry seems to be moving toward there being an actual legitimate possibility that could happen, that the ACC could either get, like they could come together and dissolve, or that there would be a way to get Clemson, Miami, and Florida State at least somewhat realistically out of those contracts with, I don't know, probably like a 9-figure check. I mean, I'm assuming we'd be talking like 9 figures at that point in time. So, and you're right. Notre Dame is different. Notre Dame doesn't have like the football tie in there. All the other sports they would have to pay up, but that's going to be a way more manageable feat than any of these schools with their football deals tied up for the next 14 years. So that's the best answer I can give you, Jason. And I hope that helps. That's the best answer I can really give you on that front. But it seems to be moving in that direction. And maybe R Webb. I mean, I'm not able to keep up with the chat live as it's going with you guys. Maybe R Webb's able to fill you in more. And speaking of, R Webb says, thank you for another donation, R Webb. R Webb says, those leftovers could be Louisville, Miami, Georgia Tech, Duke, Pitt, which aren't chopped liver. So, yeah, if the ACC blows up, then those could be potential candidates to the Big 12. Remember Louisville back in 2011, 2012, I remember a lot of chatter there, and a lot of folks were disappointed that the Big 12 did not go after Louisville, and that would have been a better play here over the last decade or so. Maybe it winds up happening anyway. After all is said and done. Now, Miami is interesting that you have Miami in there, because I would think their brand is still strong enough that it would be incredibly enticing for the SEC, and I would have a hard time picturing Miami getting left out there. But I guess they are probably third behind Clemson and Florida State. That's it. That would be like an SEC ACC country discussion that I would love to hear the ins and outs of, as to how you would power rank those three. So I guess maybe if it's that the SEC is only going to take 2, and they're going to go Clemson, Florida State, and not go Miami. But I would have a hard time seeing Miami get left out. If they did, though, I mean, look, I just watched K-State pummel Miami in 2012, the last time they played, and also win at their place on a goal line stand in thrilling fashion in 2011. So I'm all for it. I really like the U. I'm a sucker for the 30 for 30. I'm a sucker for the old school attitude and braggadocio of the U. So I'd be fine with it. And then, hey, I mean, we talk about this basketball conference all the time, if you're pulling Duke in there, but just so much of this is weird. Like Miami, you really see Miami fitting in the Big 12. It seems so ridiculous. Duke basketball, play like Cameron Indoor being a conference game in the Big 12. I mean, I understand all conventions are out the window. Any kind of guardrail for sanity and what actually makes sense is out. So I get it, but it's still very weird to picture. I think you're absolutely right there. It's just that's a very weird thing to be thinking of, with that being potentially where this league is going. All right, I'm scrolling down trying to catch up here. Boom to the Sooner. Boom to the Sooner says, and thank you for the donation, Boom to the Sooner. Boom to the Sooner says, if Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Virginia Tech joined with the Big 12, would it not be a fairly formidable conference for the Big 10 and SEC to contend with? Let's see. If you got Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Virginia Tech. Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is going to come around to bite me, because I have been the one beating the drum of like the ACC needs to watch out about Clemson and a potential dipping of Clemson from being elite to just good, because they had so much symmetry with Dabo, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and athletic director all being there and being the same for so long. And now they've lost Venables, they've lost the offensive coordinator, and they've lost the athletic director who went to Miami. So And that's all coming on the heels of the most disappointing Clemson football season in a while, where they were merely just like pretty good as opposed to elite. So I've been one of those banging the drum of like this Dabo may be on the way back down. We'll see. But still, yes, I think the potential that exists there and the brands that they have, like, yeah, that would be fairly formidable. I mean, now if you can do that, and then like Oregon and Washington are still getting left out. But I think the problem with that is, one, it seems unlikely that it would happen right now. And two, even if it did happen right now, I would see that as a pretty temporary solution, because we continue to be like on a rocket ship full steam ahead to one upper tier where it's going to be 30, 35 teams maybe. And if that's going to be the case, like when that's going to be the case, basically, again, at this point, when that is going to be the case, though, those schools will undoubtedly be included in that. And so I think you would still have like a separation there. So one of the weirder scenarios that seems actually somewhat viable here is, like I mentioned with Oregon and Washington, maybe it applies to these schools as well, that there could be like a Band-Aid Big 12 conference, or I guess it's more like a Band-Aid for Oregon, Washington, or whoever out of the ACC it would be, where, a team that's like a tweener, really good, better than the rest of the pack, but not quite enough to meet those dollar thresholds for the SEC or the Big 10 right now, could get stuck in the Big 12 for a couple of years until things take the next iteration. I do think that seems like it is at least a possibility, which is pretty fascinating. It is pretty fascinating. And honestly, at this point, just anything to extend the life of the Big 12, for me selfishly, and extend the life of my K-State Wildcats, I mean, I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Troy, appreciate the donation, Troy. Troy says, why is it that the Big 12 seems to be content with taking leftovers? Could we not lean a little forward in the saddle and go get some of the prime cuts? We've had the SEC and Big 10 picking our bones for years. Well, I love that attitude, Troy. And honestly, your attitude seems to be in line with what I would perceive Brett Yormark, the new commissioner of the Big 12, to be. I would imagine he would embrace that attitude. It's a guy that, again, at one point negotiated the largest contract in North American sports history for NASCAR with Nextel to make it the Nextel Cup Series. He also moved the Nets from New Jersey to Brooklyn. Like, that's a guy that doesn't take no for an answer, thinks very big, and has done that for a long time through a very successful career. So I'd imagine he would be there. I don't think that taking these four schools now, going back to the report again from Arizona's 24/7 site, that the Big 12 is meeting Tuesday with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado, I don't think taking those four schools would preclude you from still thinking big. I think you could still go get Washington and Oregon, but the problem is, like, right now, Washington and Oregon, I would hope you're making the phone call and having that conversation, letting them know, like, hey, there's a landing spot here. Just let us know. But they are desperately, it sounds like, trying to get into the Big 10, even to the point where, I mean, I'm going to read you some of this from the article of the Oregon radio guy with 60,000 followers. He put up a blog, and he was talking about, like, Phil Knight subsidize Oregon basically getting into the Big 10 by fronting the league some of the money. If Oregon's not going to make enough money to up the dollar value for everybody else in the conference, Phil Knight could supply extra money to make sure that the Big 10 is still made whole, and then Oregon has its home. Like, that's where I think Oregon's at, like the desperation level that they're at to get into one of the top two. So you can make the call and you can certainly try. I think it's still difficult, and there are definitely no guarantees for it. So give it your best shot. I am all for that. Like, not taking this defeatist attitude and going and taking your big swing, shoot your shot, as they say. I think that should be the attitude. And I think the Big 12 is going to have more of that attitude, especially bolstered by some of the momentum that the league seems to have right now. But with Brett Yormark as the guy instead of Bob Bowlesby, I think you're going to see more of that, Troy. So it's a good thought. It's a very, very good thought. Juan, my friend, you are far too kind with this donation. Thank you very much for it. I'm having to scroll back to it here. Juan, thank you. You're my guy. Juan says, I really appreciate all the content you brought to us, especially these regular live streams every week and special live streams whenever news is breaking. Go Cougs. Juan, thank you. Thank you. Love chatting with you. Juan talks to me on Twitter quite a bit, at JL Kurtz. You can do the same. Hit me up in the DMs, but I appreciate it a lot, Juan. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, my friend, and just being a generally good dude here and sparking good discussion in this Big 12 community that we've built up here. So let me take a second here. If you want to donate, you click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That makes sure that your chat, your question or comment gets into the chat and that I read it. supports what I'm doing here on the channel. You can also subscribe, reference the live shows. I'm typically going live Wednesday and Sunday, twice during the week, and then sprinkling in some content elsewhere throughout the week. Not only college football and conference realignment, but a lot of Big 12 specific content, especially if you are a Big 12 fan and you are new here. So spread the word too. Facebook groups with other fans of the league, wherever, message boards, like spread the word about the channel here, and let's continue growing this community, which got sparked a year ago. I mean, it was a year ago that I was really building this thing up through conference realignment. So continue to do that. And if you could like the video, everybody that's in here, won't cost you a cent. If you could like the video, I would appreciate that as well. That does help me out. Glenn says, thank you for the donation, Glenn. Glenn says, is there any way the Pac-12 survives this? I think it's on life support. I think there is a path, there's a chance if it does in fact turn out that Oregon and Washington are not going to get invited to the Big Ten. And then maybe something goes wrong with the meeting on Tuesday and the 4 schools decide that they want to stay back and they don't like what the Big 12 has to offer enough. And then you go out and try to pick off Boise and San Diego State, perhaps. Outside chance, but most of the momentum seems to be flowing in the other direction. Oregon and Washington, to me, like has to be the key. I don't see there's any way that you can exist without them. And at this point, I don't know if it gets to that with Oregon and Washington, rather stay with that league. The problem then is like the Pac-12 would kind of have to stay in their current composition. If they're going to go add new teams, then you're talking about new grant of rights. And even then, their TV contract was going to start being negotiated within the next 2 years. So Oregon and Washington are not going to sign away their grant of rights for a long time, even if they stuck with the Pac-12. So long and short of it is I really don't see, 5 years from now, I don't see much way that the Pac-12 is surviving this at all. I really don't, which again is sad. I'm not going to do that much grave dancing on the Pac-12 here, even though I'm sure there were Pac-12 fans that were doing it last year on the Big 12. I'm not going to do it. I do feel bad. I really do, because I remember very vividly what that felt like. The more in-your-face thing to do here would be like everybody that was reporting about the demise of the Big 12, especially as it regarded the Pac-12, to throw some shots back in their face. Yes, I think that is fair. I'm not going to do it toward the league or those schools, really. R. Webb, why does the SEC need 3 Florida schools, thus no Miami? Okay. Yeah, I think about it like this. If you're talking about why do they need more than that, like from a recruiting standpoint, you're right. They would already have a pretty strong foothold in there. It's not going to help them recruiting. But I think that some of that is like the old way of thinking, like with TV markets and stuff and controlling a state. And that's not really what anybody cares about anymore. It's like brands. And could you get people to tune in to watch that brand? And I still think Miami has a lot of value. I think about myself, neutral observer, college football fan. If I were watching a game and Miami pops up, I'm still going to be pretty interested in that. And that's regardless of whether or not the SEC has other Florida schools or not, which to me would indicate that there's still some monetary TV value there in Miami. But I'm also not in these rooms where they're discussing the actual value of the team. So I don't know. I do not know, but fair point. I see where you're going with that then in Miami not being in there. Robert, I appreciate the donation here. Robert says, oh boy, Robert, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum here. Robert says, I know this is wrong, but I have such, and I always, Schadenfreude, I believe is how you pronounce that. It's the term, like the German term for like taking pleasure in someone else's pain. I have such Schadenfreude over the Pac-12 situation. They are so arrogant. They deserve this. Well, from this standpoint, you are right. And I saw someone pointing this out earlier today on Twitter. The Pac-12 basically thumbed their nose at the Big 12 last year when the league came to them and was trying to meet with them and say like, hey, what about some sort of a merger here? Like, and the Pac-12 was like, no. And the attitude, especially from like the Bay Area schools like Cal, Stanford, has always been like, oh, these heathens in the Big 12. How could we ever lower ourselves to be on the same level as them? And now here they sit on the doorstep of being totally blown up and having nothing left as a conference. So from that standpoint, I get it, man. And I would not disparage you or anybody else from taking pleasure in the pain of the Pac-12 right now. I'm not going to do it. Partially because too, I mean, I love the sport of college football, and it is lame that this is happening. It is a bummer. It is lame that this is happening. It is not what I want to see happen with college football. I would much rather it be what it was with the great regional rivalries and the regional sport that it was and all of that. So, and it's, like Oregon State and Washington State in particular, they're the two that are going to get really hosed by this, and that does suck. But I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Campy 3507, what's up, Campy? Campy says if these two super conferences get to their final number of, let's say, 20 each, for the other 50 teams, how can these super conferences believe that everyone else will recognize their superiority? Okay, so you're saying if these two super conferences get to their final number of 20 each, for the other 50 teams, how can these super conferences believe that everyone else will recognize their superiority? Well, I mean, I think money talks. They're going to be making so much more money. We're already, I mean, where we're kind of at right now is totally uncharted territory as far as what the payout's going to be for these schools. The Big Ten, pre-adding USC and UCLA, was talking $100 million per school per year with a $1 billion TV contract. That's going to go up now with USC and UCLA. The SEC, if they were to go poach the ACC and add those schools, they're same thing. I mean, we're talking about $100 to $150 million per school payout to maybe like 50, 60 if you're lucky for the schools in the rest of the group, depending on what the TV contract would be. And I feel like I'm being pretty generous there. So that's one way. I mean, there's going to be so much more money flying around there, and recruiting wise, they will, they already have a recruiting advantage. Most of those schools, I would say, would only increase if and when we do get to this point, because everyone's going to be playing in those two big leagues, and the playoff access is going to be greater. And so you'll start to see that. So it just naturally, some of that stuff is going to happen, even if you wanted to really put your foot down and be like, no, forget that. We're just as important. Unfortunately, like nationally, that's how it's going to be viewed, and they'll have the money, they'll have the power, they'll have more control of the playoff. It's just going to be all those things. Now, if I'm misreading your comment there, I apologize. That's the way I'm interpreting it. But let me know if I'm off on that. But that would basically be where I think things would be at. All right, let me scroll up and make sure I didn't miss anybody real quick. I don't think I did. Okay, so we had Campy, and then real quick we had my Pitt guy, John Waffle H2P. Hail to Pitt. John Waffle, that is a great name. He says, what should Pitt do? It's a good question, man. It feels like to me Pitt is in a situation where it would just be like hope that the ACC continues to stay together. Hope maybe that the ACC adds somebody. I don't know what options Pitt has outside of that. I wouldn't think that they're an attractive option to the Big Ten, but I'll admit Pitt is a little bit of a blind spot to me. I'll actually tell you a funny story here. Maybe it's not really funny, but last night I was sitting at a bar with my friend Derek Young, who covers K-State and runs K-State Online, the K-State rival site. And we were looking at, and I know you guys will judge me for this, and it's perfectly fine. And I appreciate what Big Game Boomer does, but we were looking at the Big Game Boomer list of brand rankings in Power 5, and Pitt was like super low on that list. I want to say they were maybe even below K-State, which really shocked me. And we were having that debate, and I was like, I don't know. I thought Pitt's brand was a little bit stronger than that. I thought people had a greater perception of Pitt. Now that is one man's opinion, right? Big Game Boomer. So I don't know, but it seemed like there was people were thinking lesser of Pitt than I was. So I'll just admit, a little bit of a blind spot for me. I don't know a ton. The ACC is probably, if you're asking Power 5 conferences, where am I weakest at? It would be the ACC, I would say. Robert says, more Schadenfreude. I wonder how Pac-12 apologist Stuart Mandel spins this. I haven't really looked much at his timeline, but the problem with that, if you're in the boat of like really wanting vindication, really wanting to go after Stuart Mandel for everything last year and how he treated the Big 12 and all of that, I just don't think he really cares. Like at this point, he's covering it from a national standpoint, and the national stories do not involve the Big 12 anymore. And he just, I think, will pivot to the big national implications of all of this and what's happening with the Big 10 and what's happening with the SEC and what's happening with Notre Dame, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think there's any apology coming. Now, maybe I can get him on the channel again. He's come on a couple of times. You guys could go back and look at those videos, but he's been on twice in the last year. And this is why I don't come on and like blast him. He's a good dude. I mean, he's genuinely a good dude, and he will do the interview with me. He used to do it on my radio show in Manhattan, Kansas. He does it for the YouTube channel it's an easy one to turn down if you're a writer at The Athletic. So he's generally a good dude. I do think it was a little unfair how he reported, especially that Big 12 TV numbers piece last year before the 4 new schools were added. So I'm with you on that. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. That'll just be you. You get in his mentions, you get in the DMs, whatever it is that you need to do on Twitter. I'll stay away from that because I do very much respect the guy for the fact that he's come on and done interviews with me over and over again. Larry, shout out to Larry. Thank you for another donation. Larry says, remember, it was the California teams who didn't want any Big 12 teams. 2 have left, and the other 2 are academic snobs. Don't blame the entire conference. See, and that again is a part of like where I'm not going to go totally dance on the grave of the league. You're right. The Bay Area is really where I think a lot of that came from, right? Berkeley and Palo Alto with those 2 schools. And having been, I covered a K-State Stanford game in 2016, watched Christian McCaffrey beat K-State. Or actually, was he out that game and it was just Bryce Love? I can't remember. Either way, I watched Stanford beat K-State and went to Palo Alto. And yeah, that is worlds different than all the places I traveled in my 10 years covering the Big 12 conference. Worlds different there. So it was very much so driven by them. So I appreciate a little sticking up for the Pac-12 here, right? I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Juan, thank you for the donation, Juan. Juan says, assuming the 2 super conferences happens and then a 3rd or 4th, what happens to the playoff? Does the playoff still expand and does it include Big 12 teams? The playoff, I think, is a massive, massive question mark at this point, like what it will wind up looking like. You talk about another fascinating question in all of this. But my guess would be, now we're just way past the point. One thing I can say, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. Jim Phillips is somebody that annoyed the hell out of me with how he handled the playoff thing and basically killing the 12-team playoff where the SEC was willing to bend down, sign a contract, give charity to everybody else by allowing it to be a 12-team playoff with auto bids, which was absolute charity for the rest of the world. And yet Jim Phillips wouldn't do it. And he's the one that really put his foot down and messed it up for everybody. So there's no reason now that the SEC or the Big Ten would ever agree to any playoff with auto bids. Never, ever, 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 ever. Why would you? You will not have to worry about that. It is only taking spots away from yourself. Everybody missed the boat on that. That will not happen. So congratulations to Jim Phillips for making that decision. My best guess is that you would wind up with either an 8 or a 12-team playoff that is going to have no auto bids. And would that include the Big 12? Well, especially the way that it's trending, where the Big 12 would kind of be this like best of the rest conference. The way that it's trending, I think it would, but just because you would inevitably have a team or maybe 2 that go undefeated or have 1 loss and have enough juice still to make it into the back part of the playoff. So I would guess that you wind up with something where there still is going to be Big 12 access. Technically, it just will not be through an auto bid. So, which again is, if that were the case, I think that reasonably has worked out about as well as you could have hoped for based on where things looked last year for this league. All right. You guys have been extremely generous with the donations. I appreciate that a ton. If you guys do have more, and I'm probably going to give you like a 10-minute warning here on the chat. So if you need to get something in, get it in. But you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something in order to get your question or comment in. And in the meantime, I'm going to run through a little bit of the rest of this stuff that I had for you. This is just tagging on to the report from the Arizona 24/7 site. It says, even if the Pac-12 decided to expand with schools such as San Diego State, UNLV, and Boise State, the impact would not be close to what the Los Angeles schools brought to the market. The conference would also likely ask Oregon, Washington, and others to sign a contract to keep them within the Pac-12. And sources indicate that is unlikely, even though it would make shopping for a TV deal easier. The preference from conferences is to get all this done sooner rather than later because of the need for TV deals. So, yeah, basically shedding more doubt on the fact that the Pac-12 could ever get something figured out, locked up long-term with Oregon and Washington to agree to like a new league that includes something else, like expanding to grab somebody else at the same time. Now, the other thing I told you I would cover is the Oregon and Washington situation financially, and then how that relates to Kansas, because Kansas has long fancied itself Big Ten material. It does not appear that that's very likely right now, especially in light of some of this. Now, this comes from John Canzano. And look, I've seen the guy around. He has 60,000 followers. He has a huge following. He's a heavy hitter. He's a big player in the Oregon media scene. But if you want to be skeptical about it, That's fine, but it was an extremely well-written piece and certainly comes across like this guy knows what he's talking about and he has the credibility of a major following. So I'll just give that disclaimer here. You can interpret it how you will. But in talking about the finances of it all, he says, Thompson anticipated, he's quoting somebody here, a TV exec. Thompson, it was a former TV exec, someone who left the industry. Thompson anticipated the Pac-12 would land a deal in the neighborhood of $500 million per year average over the course of the contract. That assumed an offering of games similar to what the Pac-12 sold Fox and ESPN in their current agreement. So before losing USC and UCLA, they were anticipating getting $500 million in their TV contract. Now, the estimated valuation is $300 million per year. So losing $200 million of that value. And I'll admit, even that seems like it may be a touch high. But at that, you're still talking about losing 60% of 40% of your TV value by losing USC and UCLA, which is a huge, huge gut punch financially. And it brought me back talking about TV numbers and TV value and all that stuff from last year. Boy, that brought me back real fast to, the Big 12 just lost 50% of its TV value. And now, we're talking about maybe $9 million payouts if it's just the 8 remaining schools because you just lost 50% of your value without Texas and Oklahoma. We're talking about 40% here from USC and UCLA with what I would think would be conservative numbers from the Oregon side. But here's really the crux of it. It says the Big Ten appears focused on trying to lure Notre Dame into the fold right now. After that, Oregon and Washington may be of interest to the Big Ten. However, Thompson, again, this ex-TV executive, estimated that those two Pac-12 universities, along with the Oregon and Washington TV markets, would only generate an additional $60 million in combined additional revenues, which is well shy of the $143 million break even for the Big Ten. That is important here. So why you're not seeing Oregon and Washington being added to the Big Ten right now, along with USC and UCLA, is that they're only bringing $60 million combined to the table when they would need to bring $143 million combined to the table in order to increase the dollar value payout per school for the Big Ten, which is key. That's the break-even point. If you're adding anybody that's not at $143 million combined in two schools, you're going to be giving up money. The schools will be getting less money per school because the TV value overall, the lump sum of that would not go up enough to split the pie more ways. And so that one is a real you-know-what for Oregon and Washington because that kind of sticks them in this tweener place where they don't offer enough to get added to the Big Ten, but they're clearly a cut above what's left in the rest of the college football world. So they're in a tough spot there. But as it relates to the Big 12, that comes back to the Kansas discussion. Kansas long fancying itself a Big Ten school. They have a national championship basketball program. They are an AAU school, which matters to the Big Ten, the academics, but they have drugged down the Big 12 with the worst Power 5 football program we have maybe ever seen over a 15-year stretch ever since Mark Mangino left town. The football is dreadful. It is wretched. It is awful. And it not only brings nothing, it drags your value down. And the currency, I've long said this, I'm saying it again because there are so many people here in the chat that probably don't hear me say it on a regular basis, but Kansas fans act like the currency of the basketball program is a one-to-one, very equitable thing to having that value of football program when it's not even close. And so that's, you have the arrogance of thinking that the basketball program will carry you, but that doesn't translate. They don't know the actual rates at which that it will transfer. What am I thinking of when you're trying to the value of the dollar versus the value of the yen or something like that, it doesn't sync up. And so Kansas has long fancied itself a member of the Big Ten, but we're seeing that if you're telling me that Oregon and Washington combined is only $60 million and they're not even halfway to what they need to be to satisfy the Big Ten from a monetary standpoint, there's just no way that Kansas comes close on that. So to me, what we've seen here, how the Big Ten's operating, that dream is dead, at least for a while. I will never say never on that, as much as I give Kansas fans crap for it because they think they're a shoo-in. I will never say never on that because of AAU and basketball. They'll have a fighting chance. They'll have a puncher's chance is probably more the appropriate way to say that. But nothing that's happened since we got the news about SC and UCLA leaving would indicate what would be good. Nothing that's happened to me is good for Kansas on that front. I think Kansas is best. hope right now is just like that the Big 12 gets as strong as it possibly can. And or maybe if the ACC is going to somehow go on the aggressive and get everybody to stay together, which does not seem like they'd be able to if they expanded and then all of a sudden the grant of rights goes away. I guess that could be another hope too. But this is the same fan base that, I mean, you could go back a couple of weeks and watch my video about the Kansas fan who got tagged on Message Board Genius about saying, hey, we could go join the Pac-12 for a few years and then use that as a launching pad to the Big Ten because, we just have to get away from all these schleps in the Big 12. So I don't think any of this is good news for old KU. Campy 3507. Appreciate you, Campy. Campy says, if only 40 teams end up mattering, do you believe people like yourself and other K-State type fan bases are going to watch the super conferences? Man, that is a really good question, and I can't give you a straight up answer on that right now. I would just have to feel that out. I don't think I would care quite as much. And I mean, I am somebody, I love college football more than almost anything on this earth. Grew up with it. I grew up in the heyday of Bill Snyder. So, I mean, I saw great college football when I was young and an adolescent. I watched K-State win 11 games, 6 out of 7 years. Like I love it more than almost anything on this earth, but it is absolutely going to lose value for me when this happens. And already, like, to a certain extent is, like just a little bit of, the nostalgia. I long for the days of the old Big 12. I long for what I grew up with from like 96 to 2006, to what I would consider the real heyday there. I'm sure it will take a toll on me. I'm sure it will. And even how much I care about K-State, if it's not going to be that K-State is going to be in the real big boy club or have a fighting chance. I think especially it's going to be if you lose access to whatever the playoff is, even if you don't expect, it's not like I expect K-State to compete for that every year or even like once in a decade necessarily, but just taking away that legitimate hope and access, and then that will start to kill recruiting, and then it will be a downward spiral. So I could definitely see it gradually lessening my interest in all that. I'm too tied to it. I love it too much. I love football too much. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. I think a lot of us love football too much to say that we would be totally out and just boycott it and not watch it. I still will, man. I mean, I'll watch USC and Ohio State. Like, I know how annoying that is, and I know how annoying they are, but I would still watch it, at least for right now. It would take I think years of just sort of chipping away at me and caring less and less to the point where eventually I would start to care about something else more. I could see that happening, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. And I think some of that would be personal, and I wouldn't be able to blanket statement answer that for everybody. Cyclone Steve. What's up, Cyclone Steve? Thank you for the donation, Cyclone Steve. He says, we all knew it was going to be 2 or 4 conferences eventually, so we knew 1+ Power 5 conference has to die. Does the Big 12 understand that? Well, I see, by the way, does the Big XX? I like that, Cyclone Steve, because we don't know exactly what it's going to be the big something. We don't know exactly what, but it'll be the big something. It seems like they do, Cyclone Steve, because again, the whole genesis for this today and what you see on the headline of the video was that the Big 12 is, according to Arizona's 24/7 site, going to meet with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado on Tuesday. So they appear to have an eye toward trying to deliver the kill shot toward the Pac-12 to end that conference and kill or be killed. It seems like, Cyclone Steve, that the leadership in the Big 12 is thinking that way right now. So I think you can have some peace of mind right now about where it's at. But I'm with you. It is very unfortunate that at least one Power 5 conference is probably going to have to die. Hello Farm Life. What up, Hello Farm Life? Thank you for the donation. Hello Farm Life says, be first to 20 teams, start relegation. 10 up, 10 down, 9 games, top 3 up from bottom 3 sink to the top. Let's see. 125 sharing the top 10. 0.75 in the bottom. Cream rises to the top. Also, I hate Utah. Okay, you're making me laugh there. I assume a BYU fan then, right? Hello Farm Life. I assume BYU fan. Got a good chuckle out of that. See, that's why I love college football, man. The rivalries and some of the pot shots like that. If you guys follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm definitely into that. I appreciate that. Hello Farm Life. The relegation is interesting, and I've seen a lot of people throw that out there as like a possibility. English football or soccer. They use relegation where, if you finish down at the bottom of the league, the bottom of the table, as they would say, then you get relegated down a league and you got to work your way back up. The thing that's tough about that is like recruiting. Like just college football is so based on recruiting and Jimmy's and Joe's. And if you get relegated, it just feels like that could get really hard or like borderline impossible sometimes to pull yourself back up. So I wonder if it would just be like effectively just killing programs by doing it like that. As a concept, it seems wildly entertaining. And if the Big 12 wants to be this new zany league doing something different, then I guess congregating a massive conference and having a lower league and an upper league and then doing relegation and all that would be one way to make it much more interesting. And it certainly is a way to keep games interesting for teams that are struggling throughout the season. So watchability of the product, I think there's a lot of good there. But I wonder in practice how much, that could be like delivering a death blow to a program by relegating them if it's going to, just really hamper their recruiting then permanently from then on out. So I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that, but I like the theory. I like the theory. All right. This might be the most crowded chat we ever had. I don't remember if we topped 1,500 back in July of last year when this was all hot and heavy. So I genuinely appreciate everyone who is here. Gonna wrap it up basically here. If you have anything at the last minute, $sign below the chat box where it says say something. You can get it in now just while I kind of close up shop here. But for those of you that are new, I go live Wednesdays and Sundays. I'm certainly going to keep you up to date as we move through another conference realignment season here. I will also sprinkle in videos throughout, just standalone videos. Like I had one up earlier today if you want to catch that as well. But Wednesday and Sunday is when it's the most fun with the live shows. So definitely would encourage you to check those out. Subscribe if you have not to the channel. Make sure you turn that bell on so it'll give you an alert when I either drop content or go live. And I ask you, just spread the word. Put it out there on social media. If you're in Facebook groups with other college football fans, other fans of your school, fans of your league, let them know about the channel as I try to not only give you the best information, but give you a platform and make it as entertaining as possible. And especially if you're a Big 12 fan. We're going to cover college football and realignment at large, but you're going to get it from a Big 12 slant here because that is what this is, a community predominantly of Big 12 fans that was started last year when it was us in the position that the Pac-12 is currently in right now. And there was just a galvanizing effect for all these fans that felt like so deeply hurt, like they were going to lose something that they love so much. So that's my message to you if you're new here to the channel. Our web, Big 12 got 99 problems, but stability ain't one. I like that. I like that. I like it. Brett Yormark reference there coming from Rock Nation, Jay-Z's label, and a great Jay-Z line. And MJB set 93. What are the odds they just separate FBS level football from the NCAA straight paid player and no Title IX? I do think that's on the table. I think that's definitely on the table at some point here and likely where we're headed. And that was why I saw some of the speculation about Stanford maybe just dropping football and saying, to hell with this, we're out, because when that day arrives, they're going to be too hoity-toity to want to pay the players. So I think that's another potential scenario to think about here, like how that works. But I think there's a good chance of that. It would make the most sense, like all the issues that you have in college athletics right now, if you could collectively bargain stuff, that seems like such a sensical way to do it as opposed to what's happening right now. So yeah, I would feel like we're getting there. Troy, you are too kind. Troy says, buy a new shirt. Thank you, Troy. I do wear the black tees. I have like 10 of these. Okay. I have a lot of just plain colored tees. That's kind of my jam lately. You find tees that fit well. You just rock them. I'm not really like a big logo guy most of the time. So, I digress. Bry Guy says you missed my last one. Sorry, Bry Guy. I've been trying. There's so much going on in the chat. I see John dropped in $1 as well. Thank you, John. Bry Guy, I'm not seeing it, man. I'm sorry. I'm not seeing it. Did you slip anything else in there? I'm going to have to wrap it up here, Bry Guy, but I promise you, hit me up on Twitter or let me know in the next chat. Get my attention, and I will make sure I take care of that. Bry Guy says, no worries. It's been a minute. All right. Yeah. Sincerely do apologize, man. Chat's been moving fast tonight. It was tough to keep up with, but you guys are awesome. Thank you for being here tonight. Spread the word once again, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great rest of your holiday weekend, my friends.